You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is James Corbett, publisher of the Corbett Report and editorial writer for the International Forecaster. He is speaking with us from Japan, where he has worked and lived since 2004. Happy New Year, James.
Well, Happy New Year to you and all the listeners out there. I hope it's a good one.
James is speaking to us from Japan. Are people nervous there now that North Korea has announced it has a hydrogen bomb?
I don't think there's any more shock or outrage or worry than there usually is with these tests, and I don't think there should be any, really, at this point. Here's what we actually know, is that North Korea almost certainly did not just detonate a hydrogen bomb, as they're claiming. I'm not sure exactly what they did detonate there in their nuclear bunker, but it almost certainly was not a hydrogen bomb. With a hydrogen bomb, you would be expecting an explosive yield in the hundreds of kilotons. Even a failed H-bomb test, you would expect tens of kilotons. This test is being estimated at 6.0 kilotons, which, just for the record, is even less than their 2013 plutonium atomic bomb test. So, again, I'm not sure exactly what kind of nuclear firecracker they just set off, but it is not the H-bomb that they're proclaiming. And, this is just par for the course. I think what we're expecting to see from this is the North Korean nuclear dance. Now, all of the actors in this dance know exactly what to do. There's the outrage and the people lining up to denounce what happened or what may have happened or what they're claiming happened or what may not have happened. But who cares about the facts? Let's just denounce it and ramp up the outrage, specifically so that all the players at the table, every single side, can continue to shovel money out the back door into the military contractors' pockets as a way of drumming up the old boogeyman, the old scare, so that people can get swindled for it again. So I think that's basically what's happening. North Korea benefits from this, not only with the psyop on their own people, pretending to be this big military power taking on the world, but also to basically get everyone back at the bargaining and negotiating table with them. And all of the other people play into it because it pays very well for a lot of the military contractors who are funding a lot of these politicians.
Well, apart from atomic weapons that may or may not work, how powerful is North Korea's military?
It's a large military, but I suppose the question is how real is the threat from the North Korean military? And there's a lot of question about the parades, the military parades that they put on, whether or not the missiles and warheads they like to parade are real or paper mache, as has been speculated, given on some of the imagery that's come out of those parades. But the point is, North Korea is, it's a state that only hangs together with spit and a prayer, basically. On so many levels, and of course the question is, can you feed the troops? Can you sustain the troops? I think the real question in terms of military conflict, if North Korea were, or either provoked into or decided to launch some sort of aggressive act, is how quickly could they do some sort of strike on Seoul? And I think that would be the main question. And of course, it wouldn't last very long, but it may last long enough that they could inflict some real damage on the population there. So I think there is some degree in which the worry of the South Korean population is not completely baseless. But for any Americans or Canadians or people, separated by the Pacific Ocean, to have any fear whatsoever from the North Korean military regime, I think is very vastly overblown at this point.
China's economy, what's the general picture?
It's not looking good. Some of the latest manufacturing data shows a contraction in manufacturing, and that has added to the the continuing plunging oil prices and some poor manufacturing data out of the U.S. to send global stocks down. If you go to Bloomberg right now, as we're recording this, every single major index in the world down right now. That's never a good sign, and I think that this is I think China's a big component in that. Of course, we just saw them devalue the yuan against the U.S. dollar yet again. And this is really going to be a continuing trend because the U.S. dollar is continuing to skyrocket compared to other countries, whereas the Chinese yuan is more and more dependent on its European and Japanese trading partners and less dependent on the U.S. trading relationship. So as a trade-weighted index is probably the best way to look at the yuan. In that index, the yuan has actually appreciated over the past decade. But if you look at it against the U.S. dollar, of course, that relationship isn't holding anymore. So they're basically trying to decouple from the dollar. So we're going to see more Chinese yuan devaluations in the future. I think that's what the markets are betting on right now, and that's why we're seeing stocks across the board are going down. I think everyone understands that this is not going to be a pretty year for stocks like we've seen in the previous 7 years of this bull run.
Right, and the fact that it lasted 7 years surprised the hell out of everybody. Usually it's a 4-year cycle.
Exactly right. And of course, why did it last longer than usual? Well, there is no economic basis for this 7-year bull run. It is completely contingent on the 7 years now that we've had of this quantitative easing, central bank manipulation, zero interest rate policy manipulation that we've seen going on to try to generate this activity. All it has done is inflated the stock bubble, a bond bubble, a housing bubble, and I think we're starting to see that we have reached if not a definitive top, at least we're very close to that point. I don't think that it's expected to go up much more from here. And as you say, I mean, a 7-year bull run is beyond anyone's expectations given the underlying economic activity, and it is one of the largest bull runs in stock market history at this point. So all signs equal that this is an inflection point, and we are not expecting much growth, certainly in equities this year.
Of course, for China to be involved in a free market system or so-called free market system is a brand new thing for them. Is the fact that they overly control the stock exchange a factor against them? For example, 7% loss, they automatically stop trading. In North America, they don't do that until it hits 20%. Did they panic prematurely, and are the controls too tight? Well,
that is certainly one of the charges that's being leveled right now, and I think it's not a mistaken charge at this point. We've seen a lot of the ham-handed attempts at manipulation and of the markets that have taken place since that plunge that we saw last August. I mean, there's been a lot of either declarations and pronouncements. There's been show trials of various people. There's been threats against people selling into the market, and now they've implemented this new rule that they can come in and shut the market down. I think it's pretty obvious that they're trying to pretend that they're liberalizing their markets, but in fact they're continuing to want that iron fist control. And I think it all looks pretty ham-handed at this point. And whatever they're hoping to accomplish with this, they clearly are not accomplishing it, because as I say again, all stock markets across the world, including in China, are down right now, based on this latest Chinese devaluation, the Chinese manufacturing data, and the ongoing commodity rout.
What about the disappeared business executives in China? They haven't announced that these people have been arrested, but somehow they're just not around anymore.
It's always a guessing game of sorts what's going on in the inner workings of the Chinese economy, because again, they are trying to put on a face of liberalization and freeing up of markets, but of course we know it is rigidly controlled behind the scenes. And as I say, there have been some show trials. There was one magazine writer that was was forced to make a public confession that he had helped start the rout back in August, and things of that nature. So we know that that's going on, but as you say, there's also some things that we don't know about what's happening in the boardrooms, and it's always a question to what extent the Chinese economy is outright owned by the Chinese government, and to what extent their manipulation and coercion is taking place behind the scenes. But whatever that mixture is precisely, we know that the Chinese government is not going to let market participants just freely participate in the markets in anything like the extent that they want to portray to the rest of the world to try to encourage investment.
Chinese investors are openly blamed for Vancouver's rapidly rising real estate values, some places up 38% in 1 year. Will that flow of money from China continue to West Coast real estate?
One would imagine that as the Chinese yuan continues to devalue, and people who have ridden the decades-long, really, rise of China are now looking for ways to consolidate their gains. I'm sure that they are trying to hit the escape button even harder right now, trying to get those funds out. And of course, we know there are stringent capital controls in place in China to try to keep people from doing that, but of course that's never really been a way to stop people. There's always ways to smuggle money out, and a lot of that money has ended up in the Vancouver property markets, and I don't think that trend is going to stop. It may continue. In fact, it may even increase at this point because, again, I think a lot of people are looking for an exit right now from what is undoubtedly just the beginning of a very long trend of Chinese yuan devaluation.
And if they want a gateway into North America, the U.S. has become so much more expensive with the rising dollar. So why not look at Canada, where we have a 70-cent dollar?
Exactly right. As the Canadian dollar takes a beating because of the oil route, and I don't think that's going to change at all over the course of this year. I think it will become more attractive to Chinese looking for a way to get their own funds out of the country.
Well, I'm sure we're going to see more Chinese tourists because we might remain affordable. And they love Whistler.
There you go, yes.
Big oil. One of the experts I talked to today said he thought oil could bounce back and hit $60 a barrel by June. Any sign of that from your end?
I am on the side that does not think that is likely. It is possible. I would not say it's impossible, certainly, but I think that what we're looking at is not just something that's obviously affecting oil. I think it's a general commodity route that is based on global economic slowdown, and I do not see any out for the global economic slowdown this year. I don't expect that to change. So I think the underlying economics is not such to make a drastic change in the trend for oil right now. I think we must be something near the bottom of this route. I don't think that oil has that much more to plunge, but I'm personally not looking for a doubling in oil price by June.
China, over the last 4 years, has been buying every piece of gold they can lay their hands on. Are they still continuing their gold buying program?
They are indeed, and they are continuing to incrementally, bit by bit, reveal their gold holdings just a little bit more each time that they announce it. So that process is continuing, and it's interesting to see more information, little bits and nuggets emerging about the Chinese Army Corps that is devoted to sourcing gold, mining gold. They actually have military operations for mining gold. So I think it's becoming more and more well known that China is continuing its gold buying trend. We might see a little bit of that slow down as the yuan devaluation continues in terms of the Chinese populace and their ability even to buy gold may decline over the course of the year. But I think we're just generally going to see it as a trend. China is going to remain, I think, one of the largest gold importers in the world for some time to come.
And of course, if there's going to be a worldwide economic downturn, perhaps China was very smart to stock up on gold, because usually gold prices go up when the stock markets go down.
That's usually the logic of the situation. That has not been the logic in recent years as we've gone into this realm that is more and more dictated by central bank fiat than it is by any sort of logic. And so who knows at what point we're going to reach some sort of bottom for gold. But yes, I mean, the economic underlying reality of this is that gold at some point will start to rise as the currencies continue to be devalued. But as I say, the dollar continues to its rise in relation to other currencies. So it always depends in what currency you're holding an asset. And here in Japan, when I buy gold, it's generally actually appreciating, even as it depreciates in U.S. dollars.
Yes, I was just going to ask, is the gold play just really a buy on U.S. dollars?
At this point, I think so. I think that's why we see some downward pressure on the gold price. But again, it depends on what currency index you're looking at and what currency you're pricing it in. And as I say, if you're looking in yen, gold has actually been appreciating during this period of supposed depreciation.
We'll have more with James Corbett right after the break.
Unbelievable harmonies, spectacular performance, the ultimate tribute to the Everly Brothers and Simon and Garfunkel. Bird Dog and the Vintage Electric Band, Saturday, January 9th at the Alex Goulden Hall. Buy online and save at ontourtickets.com. More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
Welcome back. We're speaking with James Corbett. The dispute between Iran and Saudi Arabia, is there a chance this could become an actual shooting war between those two countries?
Well, yes, there's been a long simmering proxy war between these, obviously, regional power rivals, and this is certainly to be expected. In any sort of regional power vacuum, you're going to have the main rivals are going to be at each other's throats, either directly or via proxy, and that has been simmering via proxy for some years now with what's going on in Syria, obviously a close Iranian ally, and it is being destabilized by Sunnis that are largely backed by Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. And, of course, now in Yemen, you have, again, a sort of Saudi-Iran proxy conflict that's threatening to spill over directly into actual armed relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran. I think this plays into a larger military narrative that I'm thinking we're going to see play out this year. I think there will probably be some sort of resolution one way or another to the Syrian conflict over the course of this year, or at the very least the Syrian conflict will be put on the back burner. But I'm already seeing a lot of indications, certainly from the American media right now, that Iran is going to come back onto the front burner to be in the crosshairs. And if traditional, by which I mean over the course of the last 30 or 40 years or so, relations between the U.S. and the Saudis maintain as they are in terms of the American military umbrella, we'll probably see some sort of combination of U.S., NATO, and Saudi Arabian power trying to destabilize Iran. I'm not sure that will necessarily mean direct military conflict, but I think we will definitely see an intensification of vilification, of sanctions, and of various other types of pressure to be put on the Iranian government right now.
And considering they just got an agreement a few months ago.
Exactly, and almost immediately after the signing of that deal, we see new stories coming out about Iran's ballistic missile tests as being a reason for a different round of sanctions. So as the sanctions are supposedly being lifted, or maybe potentially will be lifted, we're seeing different sanctions being proposed. So I think that's just a clear sign that Iran is definitely still in the crosshairs.
And Iran is allied with Russia, isn't it?
That's right. Largely speaking, an Iranian/Chinese/Russian resistance bloc is seen as one of the core nexus of the target of the NATO powers and the Gulf states and their various allies in that region and around the globe. And you can see that certainly in the encirclement of Iran, of China, of Russia by NATO bases and the bases of allied countries. They really are encircled at this point. So I think we can see that. Again, I've been saying for years now, this is the war narrative for the 21st century. I think we're seeing that forming with the so-called new Cold War with Russia. We're seeing that with obviously continuing uneasy relations with China, and now with Iran coming back in the spotlight. I think this is really the development of the axis of evil identified by Bush. I think this is going to be the new face of the axis of evil, something along the China, Russia, Iran axis. 1
million people migrated to Europe from Africa and troubled spots in the Far East. Is that going to continue this year?
It is continuing as we speak, and the question really is how is the reaction going to play out? And we're obviously seeing ongoing social dissolution, a lot of unrest. You have the Swiss Army chief recently coming out saying there's going to be social unrest in Europe and people should be arming themselves to get ready for it. You see Sweden and Denmark now closing, shutting down their borders or putting on more stringent controls. You see a lot of these types of things playing out in the news. There's a new scandal in Germany about some mass burglary/rapes that were going on in Cologne. And I think we're going to see those sorts of stories intensifying. And I think really the ultimate outcome of this is going to be towards more centralization of control in Brussels. And we've already seen one tentative step towards that. The EU Commission last month put forward their proposal for a new consolidated border Coast Guard force that will have the power to unilaterally act even without the explicit consent of any of the EU members, at their borders to deal with whatever type of migration crisis. So we're already seeing the solution being offered for this crisis, and it is consolidation of more control in the hands of Brussels itself.
Could you see that centralized Coast Guard scooping up people in the middle of the Mediterranean and taking them back to Africa?
Well, the existing force, I believe it's the Forex, is what it's called. It has already been coordinating with the various coast guards and border patrols of various countries in the EU to coordinate their efforts and to do precisely that, to turn back some of these people or to deal with some of this. But obviously, that hasn't played out in a way that is happy for anyone at this point. So they're using that sense of crisis in order to just make sure that they have the ability to unilaterally override any of the EU participant member nations, and even potentially outside the EU is part of what the EU Commission is calling for. So I think we are going to see some testing of this, because there is the indication that some of the members, for example, Greece during the Greek meltdown crisis, were at least threatening that they could open their borders and allow more migrants in as a way of destabilizing the EU. That was one of the cards that was floated in their poker hand as they were playing poker with the so-called troika. So I think in order to shut down that possibility, I think they're going to start trying to make sure that doesn't happen again, that they can unilaterally act. And I think it's when we see some situation like that, where a country is being quote unquote too permissive with their open border, and the EU starts to clamp down, I think that's when we're going to see the rubber hit the road with regards to these policies.
Well, speaking of rubber, I know they've used rubber bullets and tear gas to try to keep migrants from overwhelming certain borders. How long before they start using live rounds?
Well, that's a good question. It's a worrying question, because, of course, this type of violence can spill over and get out of control. And as I say, I think there's an ongoing social dissolution that's taking place as a result of this throughout Europe, and that is leading to a lot of vigilantism. And I think that's probably the greater threat for the violence is people trying to take this into their own hands. And that is being amplified by a lot of the media that is playing into the kind of the reaction that we're seeing right now in Europe. So I think there's going to be a lot of unrest, and some of it may come in the form of overzealous border guards, but I think a lot of it's probably going to come as some sort of vigilante action, and if not that, certainly we're going to see some political changes taking place in Europe, as I'm sure there's going to be a much harder turn to the right politically in Europe as a result of this.
Yes, they either say a hard turn to the left or the right, but you're not going to see much down the middle.
Well, yes, and that's always the question of what that space even means in this current paradigm. However this plays out, I have no doubt that centralized bureaucracies and governments will be the ultimate winners of all of this unrest, as they generally tend to be.
The TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, how is that playing out right now in Japan?
There hasn't been a lot of news about it yet, because of course it hasn't been ratified yet. It's still working its way through ratification in a number of nations. So I think at this point people are just digesting it, preparing for it. We'll have to see once it actually gets implemented how this starts to affect daily life. But I know it has at least been suggested that Japan is going to start seeing changes, pretty drastic changes to the way not only the types of goods they're buying, but even the food they're eating, as rice has been one of those protected markets in Japan, obviously, and I think that's going to change when the TPP does, I'm sure, get ratified. I'm sure it will be ultimately ratified. So we'll have to see how it plays out. At this point, there isn't a lot of new news about it, though, and people are really just bracing for it.
Is the TPP just another step towards a worldwide government, in this case run by giant corporations?
There's no doubt that this is just another aspect of globalization, or as the globalists like to call it, global governance. Not government, governance, which is, of course, just the infrastructure for government. And I think that's precisely what this is. It just represents the next stage of that. And it really is, I think, just one more marker along the path. I think this is not the first thing that we've seen. It's not the last, I'm sure, that we'll see, but it will be an interesting case study, because it is a pretty wide area, a pretty large diversity of economies that are being wedded together in this fashion. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out and whether or not there is any sort of space for national autonomy or ways to that members of this will have any wiggle room in any of these, or whether it will be strictly enforced, how strictly enforced, what kind of enforcement will be in place. I think it will be interesting again to see how this actually plays out, but I think the overall trajectory is undeniable towards globalization and centralization. And of course, the biggest winners in this are the corporate entities that had the seat at the negotiating table, where the general public, of course, were excluded.
You may have a president, but he's not the one you elected.
Yeah.
James, thank you very much for chatting with us.
Thank you very much for having me on. Always a pleasure.
My guest has been James Corbett, publisher of the Corbett Report and editorial writer for the International Forecaster. He's been speaking to us from Japan, where he has worked and lived since 2004. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Comments about the show can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.